Welcome back to another episode of Mystery Tales from the Heart of India. Picture this, the crisp mountain air of Kashmir on March 20th, 2000, where evening prayer bells from two gurdwaras ring across the peaceful Sikh village of Chittisinghpura. Children play in narrow lanes, while elders sit beneath walnut trees, discussing the day's events. But as darkness falls, a group of armed men in Indian Army uniforms approaches the village in military vehicles. What unfolds next would shatter this tranquil community forever and expose one of the most controversial episodes in Kashmir's modern history. This is the story of the Chittisinghpura Massacre, where 35 innocent Sikhs were gunned down in cold blood, followed by a fake encounter that killed 5 more civilians and a protest that claimed 8 additional lives. In just 15 days, 48 people would die, yet 2 decades later, no family has received justice. This is India's forgotten tragedy, where truth became the first casualty and cover-ups ran deeper than the Himalayan valleys themselves. The timing couldn't have been more suspicious. Just days before U.S. President Bill Clinton's historic visit to India, the small village of Chittisinghpura was preparing for another peaceful night. This was a community where Sikhs and Muslims had lived in harmony for decades. Not a single attack on Sikhs had been reported since the Kashmir conflict began in 1990. The village, home to about 1,200 people, including 300 Sikhs, was known for its apple orchards and the warm hospitality of its residents. The community prided itself on its secular traditions. Sikh and Muslim children attended the same schools. Families celebrated each other's festivals, and the 2 gurdwaras served as symbols of peace in a region torn by conflict. As evening prayers concluded around 8 p.m., villagers noticed military vehicles approaching from opposite ends of the settlement. The men who emerged wore army fatigues and carried sophisticated weapons, yet their behavior seemed oddly theatrical. Some had dabbed their faces with holy colors. One was conspicuously drinking from a bottle of rum. And they moved with an unsettling casualness that veteran soldiers would later describe as unprofessional. Local residents later recalled feeling uneasy about their demeanor. These men seemed too relaxed, too familiar with the terrain, and strangely confident for soldiers operating in hostile territory. The armed group, numbering between 15 and 20 men, began a systematic house-to-house operation. They identified themselves as Indian Army personnel and ordered all male members to come out for routine security checks. The villagers, accustomed to such operations, complied without suspicion. Among those who emerged were shopkeepers closing their stores for the day, farmers returning from their fields, and teenagers helping their fathers with evening chores. The gunmen divided the men into 2 groups, one near each gurdwara, and made them sit with their backs against the temple walls. Without warning, without provocation, the masked gunmen opened fire at point-blank range. The sound of automatic weapons shattered the mountain silence as 35 Sikh men ranging from teenagers to elderly villagers fell dead in pools of blood outside their places of worship. The youngest victim was just 11 years old. The oldest was 75. Among the dead were Niranjan Singh, a respected schoolteacher, Gurcharan Singh, who ran the village's only medical store, and entire families wiped out in seconds. As the shooting stopped, the gunmen reportedly shouted pro-India slogans before disappearing into the night, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable carnage. The aftermath was devastating beyond description. Women rushed from their homes to find husbands and sons lying motionless and spreading pools of blood. The walls of both gurdwaras were splattered with gore, and the sacred grounds where villagers had prayed for generations became killing fields. Survivors described the haunting silence that followed the gunfire. No birds sang, no dogs barked, even the mountain wind seemed to hold its breath. The community's spiritual leader, Granthi After Singh, found his own nephew among the dead while performing the heartbreaking task of identifying bodies. The Indian government immediately blamed Pakistan-based militant groups for the attack, claiming it was calculated to embarrass India during Clinton's visit and drive a wedge between religious communities. The narrative seemed plausible, for militants seeking maximum international attention had struck at the most sensitive moment possible. Home Minister L.K. Advani announced that the massacre bore the hallmarks of Lashkar-e-Taiba and promised swift justice for the perpetrators. However, doubts emerged immediately. Local villagers reported that the attackers had visited the area multiple times in previous weeks, playing cricket with children, and engaging in casual conversations behavior, completely inconsistent with foreign militants operating in hostile territory. Village elder Jagtor Singh later testified that the same men had inquired about the community's daily routines, prayer timings, in which families had the most male members. Most disturbing were eyewitness accounts describing the attackers as fluent Urdu speakers rather than the Punjabi or Arabic that militant operatives typically used. Intelligence sources within Kashmir also raised red flags. They noted that genuine militant groups had never targeted Sikhs before, as the community had maintained strict neutrality in the Kashmir conflict. Moreover, the attackers' knowledge of the village layout, their comfort level with local terrain, and their ability to escape through heavily patrolled areas suggested insider knowledge that foreign infiltrators wouldn't possess. 5 days later, on March 25, 2000, the Indian Army claimed to have tracked down and killed the perpetrators. In Pathrable village, just a few kilometers from the original crime scene, security forces announced they had eliminated 5 foreign militants responsible for the massacre. According to official accounts, the militants were hiding in a hilltop hut when security forces surrounded them, leading to a fierce gunfight that ended with the structure being blown up and all 5 occupants killed. The 5 bodies were so badly charred that identification was impossible, yet they were hastily buried in separate locations without post-mortem examinations, a violation of standard procedure. More troubling was the fact that despite claims of an intense firefight, not a single security personnel was injured except for one officer who sustained minor wounds. Local residents immediately protested, claiming the dead men were innocent civilians who had been abducted from nearby villages in the days following the Chittisinghpura attack. The controversy exploded when families identified personal belongings found at the encounter site. They claimed the dead were 5 local men: Juma Khan, 55, another Juma Khan, 50, Zahor Ahmad Ali Bashir, Ahmed Bat, and Mohammed Yusuf Malik, laborers and petty traders, who had mysteriously disappeared. Between Mashi Sadasaleh, Zalasaleh, these were unforeign militants, but fathers and sons from the same communities that had condemned the original massacre. Family members produced photographs, identification documents, and witness testimony proving their relatives had been picked up by security forces in broad daylight. Years later, Lieutenant General K.S. Gill, a retired Indian Army officer, made explosive revelations that would rock the military establishment. In a televised interview, Gill stated, "The Army was using surrendered militants at that time to fight, to sacrifice these surrendered militants instead of themselves. These surrendered militants hatched a plot, and the Army soldiers helped them. The Army was guilty, not the commanders, but till the captain level. The full report was prepared. We said the Army was involved." Gill's allegations suggested that rogue elements within the military had orchestrated the Chittisinghpura Massacre using surrendered militants as proxies and killed innocent civilians in a staged encounter to cover their tracks. The DNA evidence scandal that followed exposed the depths of the cover-up. Under mounting pressure from human rights organizations and the victims' families, authorities agreed to exhume the 5 bodies for identification. DNA samples were collected from the victims and their alleged relatives and sent to India's premier forensic laboratories in Hyderabad and Kolkata. However, both facilities reported that the samples had been tampered with. The DNA from the supposed relatives had been substituted with other genetic material to prevent accurate identification. Dr. Syed Hasnain, director of the Center for DNA Fingerprinting and Diagnostics, confirmed the tampering but maintained professional restraint in his public comments. V.K. Kashyap from the Central Forensic Science Laboratory was more direct, stating that serious discrepancies had been found in the samples. This systematic evidence manipulation proved that someone within the system was desperately trying to prevent the truth from emerging. Fresh DNA samples, collected under strict supervision, eventually confirmed what families had claimed. All along, the 5 men killed in Pathrable were innocent civilians, not foreign militants. On April 3, 2000, thousands of local residents organized a peaceful march to demand justice for both the original massacre and the fake encounter. The protesters wanted authorities to exhume all the bodies, investigate the disappearances of other men allegedly picked up by security forces, and provide answers about the systematic cover-up. When the crowd reached the Special Operations Group camp at Brakpura, some young protesters threw stones at a police post. Security forces initially responded with lathi charges, but when the crowd persisted, Central Reserve Police Force personnel opened fire directly into the crowd. 8 protesters were killed on the spot, and 35 others were wounded in what human rights organizations described as indiscriminate shooting against unarmed civilians. The Central Bureau of Investigation eventually took over the case in 2003 and conducted a thorough probe that exposed the fake encounter in devastating detail. The CBI charge sheet filed in 2006 accused 5 Indian Army officers of cold-blooded murder: Brigadier Ajay Saxena, Lieutenant Colonel Brajendra Pratap Singh, Major Saurabh Sharma, Major Amit Saxena, and Sebedar Idris Khan. The investigation revealed that the victims had sustained 98% burn injuries, in addition to bullet wounds impossible in a genuine encounter. The CBI concluded the encounter was stage-managed with a view to obliterate the identity of the killed persons with an oblique motive. However, even this damning evidence couldn't overcome institutional immunity. The case dragged through courts for years as the Army invoked special protections under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. In 2014, all 5 officers were exonerated by a military tribunal, with the finding that evidence recorded could not establish a prima facie case against any of the accused persons. The whitewash was complete. Despite overwhelming evidence of fake encounters, evidence tampering, and civilian killings, not a single person was held accountable. Today, more than 2 decades later, the Chittisinghpura Massacre remains one of Kashmir's most controversial unsolved cases. Who really ordered the killing of 35 Sikhs? Was it foreign militants, as claimed? Or was it a false flag operation designed to influence Clinton's visit and American policy toward Pakistan? The case highlighted how institutional immunity can shield perpetrators of even the gravest crimes when state security is invoked. For the survivors, the pain remains fresh. Families still light candles on March 20th each year, remembering fathers and sons who never came home. The 48 lives lost in those 15 dark days remind us that behind every official statement and diplomatic maneuver lie real human beings whose stories deserve to be told, remembered, and honored. So I ask you, when institutions designed to protect citizens become instruments of oppression, where do ordinary people turn for accountability? In remembering tragedies like Chittisinghpura, how do we honor the victims while working to prevent such horrors from recurring? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this forgotten chapter moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, because next time we'll uncover another buried truth where the powerful tried to rewrite history, but the voices of the victims refused to be silenced. Till then, stay vigilant, stay questioning, and remember, the greatest tragedies occur not just when evil acts, but when good people choose to remain silent in its aftermath.